So growing up, hot mic. Growing up, one of my very best friends always had these huge, gigantic Christmases, like massive, right? And so, so we get through Christmas, and I'd be like, man, I'm, call my buddy and find out what he got, and I'd call him, and this was back when like you had to walk to the phone and it wasn't in your pocket and all those things, and so I'd go and I'd call him and I'd be like, hey, what'd you get for Christmas? He'd be like, oh man, it was awesome. I got new shoes. I got new Jordans, and then I got another pair of Jordans, and then I got 13 jerseys, and I got a brand new set of tailor-made golf clubs, and then my parents bought me a boat, that kind of thing. And he'd be like, what'd you get? It's like the dreaded question, right? He'd be like, I got 12 pairs of socks. Not 6. I got 12. All the same color. Oh, cool. Anything else? Soap. And it was just, and eventually it got to the point where like I didn't even want to call him and ask him what he got, because it's like I'm gonna just feel like my parents don't love me. And they do, and my mom's here right now, and I warned her in advance that I was going to tell a joke about that. But it is true that as a young kid, like I had this deep internal crisis, because my buddy got all this stuff that I would have loved, and in comparison, it felt like I got very, very little. Now, our families, as you get older and you start to look back, like you realize like our families just operated from very fundamentally different philosophical places about the right way to approach that kind of a thing. And wouldn't you know it, as a dad, like I fall more into line with where my parents were than where his parents were. But as a kid, man, it was tough. And for all of us, comparison starts at a very, very young age, right? And that's a little bit of a ridiculous example, but some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like you remember those conversations with your friends where you're like, oh man, I don't even want to ask them what they got for Christmas because I know they're going to ask me and I didn't get much and they probably got a ton. And if you're like, I have no idea what that conversation is, that's because you were that kid. Like you're the one whose parents bought them everything. The comparison starts young, and whether it's Christmas presents, whether it's appearance, whether it's the kind of clothes you wear, or the type of car that you drive, like a comparison starts young. And for all of us, it becomes a thing that gets very woven into who we are. And as we get older, certainly the objects change, right? Like the things that we compare, the things that we put importance on, those things shift and those things change. But the basic underlying kind of like I compare myself to others, for most of us, that sticks around for a very, very long time. There's a reason that the phrase keeping up with the Joneses is a phrase. It's also interesting to me because I think, and this is my opinion, but I think that we live in a particular moment in time where comparison is harder to not do and way easier to like let it kind of run wild in our lives than ever before. And the reason why I say that is because when I was a kid and my buddy I knew had an incredible Christmas, I had to walk to the phone, pick up the phone, call him, hope that he would answer. He might not. If he didn't, I had to leave a voicemail and hope that he would call me back. He might not. I would see him eventually. We went to different schools, but we went to church together. And so eventually I knew I would see him, but like I had to put forth effort toward maybe having a conversation with one person. Now, we all have a phone in our pockets. And for most of us, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have something on our phones, some social media that allows us very quickly to not just see what one friend has, but what a whole bunch of them have. And to make matters worse, we don't just see what they have, but we see the highlight reel of their lives, and we compare their highlight reel to our blooper reel. Right? So we look at somebody's social media and we think, oh man, they're like just look at the vacation they just took, and look how they're all smiling in that picture, and man, I couldn't even get our family to smile for one picture. Right? But here's the thing, they're saying the same thing. Because we have a picture with our family smiling, and they have no idea what it took to make that happen, right? They don't know that our kid's mouth is taped this way. They have no idea. So we compare our blooper reel to everybody else's highlight reel. There's been some fascinating studies done in recent years and are continuing to be done. There's a lot of research happening right now around the connection between smartphones and social media and anxiety and depression. Fascinating studies are beginning to come out that are significantly connecting. Most mental health professionals will tell you that there is a crisis of mental health, of anxiety and depression right now. It has gotten dramatically worse over the years. And a lot of researchers are now finding that the spike began around 2013, which was the first year that smartphone usage became a thing for more than 50% of the population. And right around then is where things started to spike. And people are beginning to identify that this thing right here, it's killing us in a lot of ways. It's killing our minds. And critically, it does it because of the way we compare our lives to other people's lives. And not just one person's life. Like, it was one thing when I was like, oh man, my buddy gets these awesome Christmases. Right? But when it's not just one person's life, but it's this person's life, and that person's life, and that person's life, and that person's life, and that person's life. And I forget that I'm looking at a highlight reel. That all of a sudden our life seems insignificant. And it seems bad. And it seems like things are great for everyone else and not good at all for us. Now, the Bible actually, I believe that the Bible actually tells us why this comparison thing is so significant. I think it actually tells us why, what science right now is trying to figure out. Like, why is it that smartphones and that social media, why is it that it's causing such an epidemic of mental health issues? I think that Jesus actually told us why. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible, you may know that Jesus taught often in what are known as parables. And if you aren't familiar with what that is, all it is that parables are stories that teach a truth. It's like a modern day parable might be like the boy who cried wolf, right? So you might tell your kid, when your kid lies, because they all do, you might tell them the boy who cried wolf. And what's the goal? The goal is to illustrate to that kid, hey, if you lie enough times, people will not believe you when you need them to believe you. Like, eventually, you ruin trust, right? That's the purpose of that story. It's a fictional story that teaches an important truth about real life. And that's what parables are. Now, in the book of Matthew, we find a parable known as the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And it's a really interesting parable because it speaks so directly to this comparison issue that we have today. It's also a fascinating parable because, to be real honest, I don't love it. There's a part of it that grates against me. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So I'm going to read this. We're going to read straight through the parable. And then we're going to talk at the end of it about what implications this has for us. And specifically why comparison costs us so much. Not just today, but why it always has for all of history. Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 1, Jesus says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard." Let's pause for just a moment. Keep in mind that the people hearing this parable would have lived mostly in an agricultural society. They would have been used to this kind of thing. Not everybody had a steady, full-time, everyday job that they just went to. A lot of people were literally like day hires. So they would just kind of hang out in the middle of town waiting for some farmer to come and say, hey, you want to work today? Hey, you want to work today? Now, a denarius was a pretty good pay for a day's work. It wasn't like you weren't going to be rolling in it, but it was good pay for a day's work. So put yourself in the middle of the story. There's a landowner who goes in the morning to hire a worker for his vineyards. He agrees to pay them a denarius for the day. About 9 in the morning, as Jesus continues, about 9 in the morning, he went out and he saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, hey, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right. I want you to keep that phrase in mind. I'll pay you whatever is right. So they went. Now he's got 2 shifts of workers. The first workers probably started somewhere around 6 or 7 in the morning. The second set of workers starting around 9. As Jesus continues, he says, he went out again, he being the farmer. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon. And he did the same thing. And we got 4 shifts of workers, 6 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing? They say, well, nobody hired us. The farmer says, you go work in my vineyard too. 5 shifts, 9 a.m., or 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., 5 p.m. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. Pause. What Jesus says next is exactly what you would not expect to happen. Now, if it's me, I would think about the amount of time that they worked, and I would think about an hourly wage, and I would pay them accordingly. People who started at 5, they're going to get the least, 3, noon, on down, right? This makes sense to us, right? That's the way you should handle this. And remember, the farmer said, I'll pay you whatever is right. As Jesus continues the story, that's not what happens at all. It says, the workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and they each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. So they're standing watching, and they're going, hey, the 5 o'clock guys, they got a denarius. And they're probably like doing math in their head, right? They're like, and then there was the 3 p.m. guys, and then there was the noon guys, and then there was the 9, and they're like, we're going to get like 5 denarius each, man. But that's not what happens. But each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they did what you would do and what I would do. They began to grumble against the landowner. They said, these who were hired last, they worked only 1 hour. And you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. That's a pretty compelling argument, I think, right? Hey, those guys worked 1 hour, and they did it when it was cool. I worked 12 hours through the heat of the day. But he being the landowner, he answered one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? If you're a note taker, I want you to circle those 2 words, envious, generous. Are you envious because I am generous? Now, to this point, Jesus has been telling a story. And it's a story, like I said, that it grates on me a little bit. Because we live in a culture that likes to be fair, don't we? We want things to be even. We want things to make sense. What makes sense is not what Jesus says the landowner did. What made sense is what the workers thought was going to happen, which is that those who started earliest receive more, and accordingly on down the line. They worked longer. They worked through the heat of the day. And the landowner's response, it's not fair. It's not fair at all. He says, hey, you agreed to work for exactly what I just paid you. Now that part is fair. But then he says, it's my money. Don't I have the right to do what I want with it? And it's like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. But you gave them the same amount. And that closing line, are you envious because I am generous, holds so much meaning and so much challenging truth. And as Jesus finishes up the parable, he tells this whole story, and then he gives one short sentence of commentary at the end. Keep in mind that as Jesus started this, he said, the kingdom of heaven is like. Jesus is talking about the ethos of the way that God operates. He's not just telling a story. He's saying this is the way God does things. He operates like this landowner. And he tells the story, and then he closes with one line. He says, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. Now, to the people hearing this would have been, like, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. It grates on me a little bit, like, it should be more fair than that. But to the people hearing this would have been a real slap in the face to many of them. But it is a crucial, crucial truth. See, Jesus, essentially through this parable, Jesus says, look, you expect the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. You expect it to be fair, but it's not fair. And if your expectation is that the way God operates is in fairness toward everyone, you're going to be disappointed because that is not how he operates at all. Now, if you take a second to think about it, this is actually a good thing. If you look beyond the surface, this is actually a really good thing. If you're the first person that worked in the vineyard, it's not a good thing. But if you're any of the remaining four, and especially that last person who worked in the vineyard, you don't want it to be fair, do you? I mean, you're like, awesome. I got the same amount those guys did. I was here for an hour. That's great. None of us would turn that down. 0%. I don't know, maybe you're like a really, really great person and you would, like, more power to you. Most of us would not. We'd be like, great. None of us would be like, yeah, but that's not fair. It's just not fair. Here, you give me a fifth of what those guys got. It's fine. Give me a fifth. Be like, I'm gonna sleep in a little bit tomorrow. I'm gonna go to the market about 4 p.m. I'm gonna hang out for a while. And when this guy comes back and says, why aren't you working? I'm gonna be like, nobody hired me, man. That's not a lie. Nobody hired me. And he's gonna be like, come work. And I'm gonna go work for an hour. This is a good deal. See, we want fairness when we compare to people who we think deserve less. But otherwise, what do we want? Otherwise, we want generosity. See, the thing that's good about this story is that if God were fair to us, if God treated us all fairly, then all of our life would essentially just be a stacking up how much good we did versus how other people did. Critically, it would mean that Jesus came for nothing. And most importantly, it would mean that the grace and the mercy and the love of God wouldn't be what they are at all. Because God gives those things from a place of abundant generosity. He doesn't give grace and love and mercy to me based on fairness as compared to everyone else. And oh my goodness, am I glad he doesn't. Because what I need is God's generosity. And so if we take a step back if we take a step back and instead of going, yeah, but that's not fair, and we say, but what do I want from God? What do I want from the kingdom of heaven? What I want is not fairness. What I want is generosity. In fact, and this might be a strong way to say it, but I don't think that fairness and generosity are actually compatible with one another at all. I don't think that they can coexist. Because generosity by its very nature is going to, at times, give abundantly. It is going to give more than what a person deserves, which means it's not fair. And again, I don't know about you, but oh my goodness, do I want God's generosity in my life and not his fairness. The generosity of God is not compatible with fairness. We have to choose one or the other. And this is what the first worker got wrong, the first set of workers. The first set of workers fundamentally misunderstood that what God had demonstrated to them was generosity. If the owner of the vineyard hadn't come at all, they would have received nothing. Zilch. And instead, the landowner offered them a good day's wage. Like they got paid well for what they did that day. That's generous, that's kind. He didn't have to offer them a job at all, but he did. And instead of being grateful, and instead of being thankful, and instead of having peace and contentment with what they were given, they looked at what everybody else had and said, that's not fair. And that's the fundamental problem with comparison, isn't it? The fundamental problem with comparison is we want everything to be fair, and when it's not, which, how often do we tell our kids life's not fair? Like we know this. And yet somehow often we still operate from this place of thinking that God is going to just treat everybody fairly. And when he doesn't, instead of being grateful for what we have and grateful for the generosity with which he gives to others, we get upset and we get angry and we get frustrated and we say, but they don't, but I, but they, but I, but they. And when we do that, all joy is gone. All peace is gone. All contentment is gone. See, the reason that I think that smartphones and that social media and that this comparison game that we all play so often in our lives, the reason why I think it's so significant, what I believe that Jesus is teaching us here is that comparison steals joy from generosity. Comparison steals joy. And you can insert all kinds of words there. Comparison steals peace from generosity. Comparison steals contentment from generosity. Comparison steals joy from generosity. And to be clear, I think this is true from anybody that's being generous, not just with God, but it is especially true with God. When we compare, there is no possibility of living with joy in our hearts. It's not possible. Because we always need something more. There's always somebody else ahead. There's always somebody else who God has blessed more. I remember early on in the church planting process, we planted our church through an organization out of Alabama, and the whole thing that they did was they would train you, and so they gave you like kind of this blueprint for how to start a church, and then they would provide you a coach to help you launch. And so we go through this process, and we go down to Alabama at one point, and there's these church planters who are working through this material to train us on how to launch a church. And one of the main modules of the day was like fundraising. And so this guy gets up and he's telling the story of his church, and the church I think was like 2 years old at this point. It's in Colorado, and called Front Range, and he's telling us the whole story of this church, and he gets this one point, and he's like, man, you know, we started to fundraise, and God just began to pour out his blessing on us, and this and that and the other thing. And then he goes, he says, God gave us $950,000 to launch our church. And I'm sitting in the seat like, is that a number? Is that a money number? Like I can't fathom. So we get through the training, and Vanessa and I are just blown away. Like, how is that possible? And so I called this guy. I was like, hey man, like, I have literally no idea how to raise $9.50. So I'd like to come to Colorado, and I'd like to just talk with you. He's like, all right. So we planned it, and I bought a plane ticket, and I flew out to Colorado, and I was there for, I think 3 days, 2 or 3 days. Hung out with this guy, and met his staff team, and got to experience his church, and eventually, you know, got some one-on-one time with him, and I sat down, and like we sit down, and I'm like giddy. I'm so excited. And we sit down, and I look at him, and I'm like, all right, man, how did you raise that money? Like, I want the play-by-play. Give me every single step you took. And he looks at me, and he shakes his head. He goes, I don't know, man, favor of God. Like, that is the worst answer you could give me right now. Just, that's the worst. Why would you say that? Like, but what did you do? What did you do? Well, come to find out that this guy worked at a big church for a long time, and he knew this guy who knew this guy. And this guy was the executive pastor at Red Rocks Church in Colorado, and Red Rocks is a church of like 20,000 people. And he's like, man, they wrote me a check for $350,000. Like, oh, okay. Can I know that guy? Want to make an introduction here? Vouch for me like you've known me all your life? I get back and try to run this guy, and he did give me some practical things, but try to run this guy's playbook, and suffice to say, we did not raise $950,000. And I am not exaggerating when I say that I had like a deep internal crisis. Because here's the question that started to rattle in my soul. If God did that for him because God's favor was on him, then God's favor must not be on me. I must have done something wrong. God must not be happy enough with me to give to me like he gave to him. And that is a question that can destroy a human. Now, at the same time, the irony is that I didn't know legitimately how I was going to raise $9.50, and God provided for us somewhere in the range of $120,000 by the time it was all said and done, which was crazy. But all I could think was not $950,000. In the end, after some time and a lot of prayer and God working on my heart, I realized that there were some people on social media, some pastors that I needed to unfollow. Because when I would see their pictures and when I would hear their stories, it ate at me. Because all I saw was God didn't give me that. Why, God? Why? And wouldn't you know, it had this annoying habit of stealing joy from me. Because I wasn't okay with the incredible blessings that God had given us, with the incredible things that he had done, with the incredible people that he had sent, some of whom are still with us today. I couldn't see all the good that God did because I was so wrapped up in the fact that God hadn't been fair to me. And the joy that I should have gotten from God's generosity was gone. Throughout the Bible, God has this tendency of turning the natural order of things on its head. This is a driving ethos of the kingdom of God. All throughout the Bible, God does this thing where, and Jesus does this a lot in his teaching, where he'll talk about a thing that we expect to go a certain way, and then he'll say, but the kingdom of heaven is different. Like this. We expect God to be fair. But Jesus says, no, the kingdom of God isn't about fairness, it's about generosity. And there's a critically important reason that that's the case, I think. And that reason will help us if we should choose to take the journey down killing the comparison game in our lives. It's a reason that will help us to kill that. It's a question that certainly for me helped me kill it over the years. So see, the reason that God does this thing where he upsets the apple cart, where he does things in a different way than we expect, is it forces us to answer a simple but very, very difficult question. Do I actually trust God? Do I actually trust him? It's so easy for us to stand back and say, I trust God, I trust God, I trust God, I trust God. But what happens when that guy got $950,000 and I didn't? Do I trust God then? Do I trust God when he is exceedingly generous to someone that I don't think deserves it? Or do I only want God's generosity when it benefits me? Do I trust what God has given me more than what I think I should have? That's a tough one. Do I trust what God has given me more than what I think I should have? Do I believe that God has been good to me, even if other people have things I want, but that I don't have? Do I choose to be content where I am, knowing God has me right there for a reason, even if I can't see that reason at all? Do I trust that no matter how my life looks compared to others, that God is still with me, and that God is still for me, and that God is working? See, envy and jealousness in our hearts, I think, are maybe the most significant indicator of a trust issue that we could have. I'm painting with broad strokes there. That may not be true. I'm giving my opinion. But I think that envy and jealousness in our hearts are the best indicator of a trust issue that exists. Because at the end of the day, when I envy or when I'm jealous, what I am saying is what God has done is not enough. Period. See, as humans, we have this really good way of like complexifying simple things, right? We have this really like intuitive knack of excusing our own behavior by just making it more complex and not just simplifying it. If I have envy in my heart, if I have jealousness in my heart, if I have comparison in my heart that makes me look at what other people have and go, I should have that, but I don't. If that exists inside of me, what I'm saying to God is, you got it wrong. Period. God, you messed up. You didn't give me enough, or you gave them too much. But either way, you messed up. And God, you need to fix it. And it steals all our joy. It steals all our life. It steals all of our peace and all of our hope in the generosity of God. And in the end, in the worst of scenarios, it causes us to doubt the goodness of God altogether. And so here's the question. Here's the question that I had to ask myself. Here's the question that for me over months and years of asking this question, the truth made its way into my heart. And I'm not going to stand up here and be so arrogant as to say that I never compare myself to anybody anymore, because that's not true. And I still have to fight and ask myself this question on a regular basis. But praise God, less than I used to. The question is this: has God been good to me? That's it. Has God been good to me? Has God been good to me? That's it. Again, we have this tendency to make complex that which is simple. If you want to fight the comparison game in your own life, specifically in your relationship with God, you need to ask yourself that question over and over and over and over. And you need to be honest with yourself about the answers. God was incredibly good to me in that season. God provided me with, I had no idea where money was going to come from. I had no idea where team members were going to come from. I had no idea how we were going to find a facility. I had no idea how we were going to live with my parents and survive that. There were so many things that I had no clue how they were going to work out. And every single step along the way, God said, here. And the reality is, when I took a step back from comparison, I said, has God been good to me? The answer had to be yes. He has been extravagantly good to me. Has he been as extravagantly generous as he was to that person? I think were God standing there when I asked him those questions, he might have looked at me and said, can't I do with my stuff what I want? You know, it's funny because this is such an easy thing to gloss past. It's such an easy thing to say, well, I don't compare much. I'm not bad at this. Maybe a little bit, but it's not a huge deal in my life. In fact, my guess is that if I was sitting down with most of us, we would probably say, I know that comparison isn't good. I know that jealousy and envy aren't good, and so I work really hard to make sure that doesn't take root in my life. I don't think I'm too bad at that. But the reality is, every single time we compare what we have to what someone else has, every time it just steals a little bit of joy. Every single time. Every time. There is no moment where comparison doesn't behave just like a thief. There is no moment. It is a thief every time it happens. Every time. And so my hope, or what I hope doesn't happen, is I hope that we don't leave today and kind of do that. I hope that we don't leave and play the but I'm pretty good at that game. I hope that we don't leave and play the, yeah, but I mostly don't do that game. Or the no, I don't do that at all game. And then get on Facebook and as we're scrolling through, we feel that little thing in our heart, and so we just scroll faster. I didn't see that. No, you did. And it stole a little bit of joy. Maybe for some of us, we may realize that the issue in our lives, the comparison issue is big enough that we need to get rid of social media altogether. I'm not going to prescribe what needs to happen in your life. I have social media. A lot of you don't know I have social media because I don't do anything. I just look at other people's lives. It's great. I just spy on people I know. That was funnier than you acted because you do it too. You're like, I don't. You spy on people? How dare you? You do it too. I have social media, and I have to constantly check my heart as I scroll through. I have to constantly remind myself to ask the question, has God been good to me? In the moments where I feel that joy starting to go, has God been good to me? 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 Imagine for a moment a world where Christians the world over got this right. Where Christians the world over lived free of the chains of comparison. Where we were truly just grateful for what God had given us. I think a couple things would happen. Number one, the light of the church would shine so much brighter than it shines right now. People want to come up with all these reasons why the church isn't making any difference in the world today. And you want to know what I think one of it is? Is that most Christians are miserable. And so non-Christians look at us and go, why would I want that? You don't even like God. You think you do, but you don't. It's obvious. You're mad at him all the time. And I think that if Christians the world over could get rid of the chains of comparison, the trap of comparison, I think first of all, the light of the church would shine immensely brighter than it does right now. You know what else I think would happen? I think we'd be able to celebrate God's generosity in other people's lives a whole lot better. Because you want to know what the reality was about that guy in Colorado that my soul was angry at? The reality is I should have been thrilled for him. I should have been so glad that God had done that for him. Instead of being mad that God didn't do it for me. If my kids acted that way towards somebody else, I would have it out with them. You know what I mean? And yet me as a grown adult pastor, I'm like, oh, God's bad to me. God's not fair. No, what I should have been doing was, oh my goodness, when he said, I don't know, favor of God, I should have been weeping over the incredible blessings of God's generosity. And then I should have started praying hard. Hey, God, would you show me favor like you showed him? And if you don't, would you give me contentment with whatever you've given me? But I didn't do that. I think our light would shine a lot brighter. And I think that we'd be able to celebrate God's generosity to others a whole lot better. And those two things are something that would make God so much more attractive to a world that is stuck comparing everything to everybody. So, stop letting comparison steal your joy. Stop letting comparison steal your hope. Stop letting comparison steal your peace. Instead, ask yourself, has God been good to me? Has God been good to me? And when you inevitably arrive at the answer that yes, he has. It may not look like I expected. It may not be exactly what I wanted, but God has been good. Find peace in that moment. Find joy in that moment, and let that be enough. Let me pray for us.